Nice to have you on, Alexi Russell and Nick Ward. Thanks for being with me this afternoon.
Pleasure.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, Friday, 3:45. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, it's a resounding yes from rugby's heartland to selling off part of the All Blacks to US investors. So what or how much is in it for them exactly? Former All Blacks player and coach Laurie Mains joins us. A woman who accidentally fatally shot her partner gets 9 months home D. What's stopping Northland DHB reaching its COVID vaccination targets? The government was warned its housing shake-up could hurt renters, but it went ahead anyway. And the Super City Mayor wades in to the standoff between Ports of Auckland and the Union. No longer the Golden Mile, Queen Street businesses say it's pretty pedestrian and they're taking it to court. And the forgotten Pohutakawa that could face the chop.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The government received numerous warnings from officials that its major housing package could hurt vulnerable renters, but pressed ahead regardless. Newly released documents show the Housing Minister did seek advice on whether rent controls might help limit the pain, but was advised against it. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The advice makes stark reading. The Ministry of Housing told ministers their grand plan could in fact drive up rents. It did note that landlords were unlikely to pass on the full cost, but only because some renters were already stretched to their limit. The ministry says they could end up crowding together in smaller houses, and that if landlords sold up, renters could be turfed out altogether. Treasury warned that any rent pressure would hit Māori and Pacific people hardest. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
NZ Rugby Chair Brent Impey has reiterated that top players would be making a terrible mistake not to ratify a deal with private equity firm Silver Lake. Provincial unions have unanimously approved a deal to sell a 12.5% stake in NZ Rugby's commercial interests in a deal worth $387 million. But Mr Impey says the deal is needed to bolster all of rugby.
I think it would be a terrible mistake if the players don't eventually support this deal. A really bad mistake. We talk about the community game, but it's the kids running around the field. Go to the Weymouth Rugby Club, where they're really struggling with the kids with no boots, they've got jerseys, struggle to get coaches. I mean, and that's replicated in many parts of New Zealand. So we're trying to solve that as an issue.
Brent Impey says the deal now moves to talks with players through the Players Association, which has expressed doubt. The chair of the Council of Medical Colleges has defended Northland DHB for its slow vaccination rollout. Northland has administered just 62% of its vaccine target as of Sunday night and has been singled out as the worst performing district health board when it comes to distribution. Dr John Bonning says vaccine rollout can be a logistical nightmare, especially in sparsely populated regions like Northland.
Look, there are some issues with the fact that the Pfizer needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees cold chain storage, and getting it to rural and regional areas is a little bit more challenging. So we need to help and support people, take the vaccine out to our communities and support them to come into centres so they can receive it.
The Council of Medical Colleges Chair, Dr John Bonning. President Biden has told a joint session of Congress that America is on the move again as he marks his first 100 days in office. He's outlined 2 new packages to ensure it keeps moving. He says his American Jobs Plan would be a blue-collar blueprint to build America and create millions of green jobs.
This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. Creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines so every American can drink clean water.
Mr Biden promised a reversal of his predecessor's tax cuts, saying the richest Americans and US companies would pay their fair share of taxes. He says it's time to grow the economy from the bottom. 8 people have been arrested and police have disrupted plans to import hundreds of kilograms of cocaine from Mexico. Detectives began investigating the group last September. Chen Liu reports.
The Police and Customs Service carried out search warrants at 10 properties and a boat in Bay of Plenty, Northland and Auckland this morning. It's alleged that those involved planned to import cocaine and methamphetamine into New Zealand via shipping containers and from Central America by courier mail. The men, aged between 26 and 62, included 2 patched members of the Rotorua chapter of the Filthy Few Motorcycle Club. They face multiple drugs-related charges and are due to appear in a Tauranga District Court over the coming days. Ko Chan Liu, Aho.
It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. All Black hooker Dane Coles is unsure if New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association will be able to come to terms over the proposed Silver Lake deal. Provincial unions have unanimously approved the deal with Silver Lake, who'll get a 12.5% stake in the NZ Rugby's commercial interest in the $387 million deal. However, the deal also needs sign-off from the Players Association, which has cited concerns over a loss of control and the risk of cultural misappropriation. Talks between the two parties have broken down, and Coles, who's been involved in discussions, isn't confident a solution can be reached.
This is a very big decision, mate, and it's something we could look back in 100 years and like, why did we make this decision? Or we could look back in 100 years and we're glad that we made the decision. If it was about the money, mate, we'd say yes, you know, plain and simple. But it's not about the money. It's about having the future as bright as we can and looking after everyone.
Joseph Parker's new trainer, Andy Lee, believes they've fixed a crucial flaw in the New Zealand boxer's skill set ahead of his fight against British veteran Derek Chisora. Having split with longtime mentor Kevin Barry, Parker has teamed up with Lee for Sunday's heavyweight clash in Manchester. The Irish former middleweight world champion says they've been working hard on Parker's punching technique and weight transfer. Manchester City have taken a big step towards their first Champions League title with the 2-1 away win over last year's runners-up Paris Saint-Germain in the semi-final first leg. That's the news.
Emergency housing moteliers are facing damage and threats.
Yeah, we were threatened with a knife to be killed. Luckily, I didn't open my door to this girl.
But just how much is it costing? Providers are getting hundreds of dollars per night, but now we are hearing that there are damages available as well. The problem is we don't know how much, and the government commits to change.
There are often high and complex needs. That's where it makes sense that you do have that wraparound support available.
And you're going to do it?
Yes.
Questions and Answers Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from 8 service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine or becoming fine tonight. A few light showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. Waitomo to Manawatu, including Taumaranui and Taihape, fine. Then cloudy periods and isolated showers from tonight. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty. Taupo, Gisborne through to Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine weather, cloud developing in the south from tomorrow afternoon. For the Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, fine at first, cloud and showers spreading from the south tomorrow afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland, mostly cloudy. Isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow afternoon and evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland. Occasional rain or drizzle for Fiordland and coastal parts of Southland and Clutha. Rain throughout tomorrow morning, possibly thundery in Fiordland, followed by fine spells and isolated showers. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. Rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā. It was a resounding yes from provincial unions today for New Zealand Rugby's plan to sell a portion of the organisation to US firm Silver Lake. All 26 unions and the Māori Rugby Board gave the deal their tick of approval today, believing it is the best way to save the game in this country. However, the $387 million deal is still not complete because the players are yet to agree to it. Mediation is at a stalemate, with the two parties said to be way apart on the issue. Sports reporter Barry Guy was at today's AGM.
Can I ask all those in favour of the resolution as read to please say aye. Aye. All those against say no. I declare the motion carried. to say a few words at the end of that, but what you just did was incredibly significant.
There was little doubt that New Zealand Rugby was keen to present a united front for their support of the sale, and Chairman Brent Impey was confident of the full backing of the provinces. And that they did. Unanimous support from the provincial unions and the Māori Rugby Board to the big money deal. However, the question remains, will the players give their backing? Mediation is continuing between the two parties, with them unable to agree on how the money from the deal will be split. RNZ understands the gap between the two is significant, so I asked Impey if the players were being greedy.
Out of this process, the professional players will be getting pay rises. So there's no issue around the money that we would be offering the Players Association in terms of increase. There are issues around the percentages, as has been published in the past couple of days. But for us, the build-up of the legacy fund, the critical area it has to go to is into that community game.
And the cash injection from Silver Lake is certainly needed at the lower level, especially after the impact of COVID-19. New Zealand Rugby today announced an operating loss of $18.7 million for the last year. So when might the players get on board? Veteran All Black hooker Dane Cole says it's not just about the money, and so they don't want to rush into anything.
This is a very big decision, mate, and it's something we could look back in 100 years and like, why did we make this decision? Or we could look back in 100 years and we're glad that we made the decision. And I know the Players Association have got the players' best interest at heart. If it was about the money, mate, we'd say yes.
The All Black brand is a major issue, and how will that be affected by the sale? There has been speculation that a foreign investor is going to want the All Blacks brand spread around the world, and that could mean more matches and more matches overseas. New Zealand Rugby boss Mark Robinson says that isn't the case.
Private equity investors, from what we are hearing coming into the game, be it CVC or Silver Lake, not want to have more and more and more rugby. It is simply a fallacy to suggest that is what their focus is on. And we've never supported that thesis either in terms of what it means for player welfare, which is our number one concern in the game for all of our participants right across the game. So to suggest that it's going to be more and more rugby and playing and travelling circuses and all this thing is just frankly ridiculous.
While New Zealand Rugby has given the sale the green light, the agreement between them and the players may still be some time off. Chairman Brent Impey is hoping it doesn't take too long.
And I think it would be a terrible mistake if the players don't eventually support this deal. A really bad mistake for we talk about the community game, but it's the kids running around the field.
For Checkpoint, Barry Guy.
Laurie Mains has been playing rugby since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and he went on to play for and coach the All Blacks. He can't fathom why the professional players aren't getting in behind a deal that has the unanimous support of the grassroots.
I can't think of why they would want to oppose this, because at the end of the day, my understanding is that the players get a percentage of the gross income from the commercial company, and Silver Lake are going to grow the pie, not diminish it. And I would imagine that they would end up getting a bigger slice of money than they do at present. But for any other reason, I cannot possibly understand. And what I don't understand most of all, those people rely on the goodwill of rugby throughout New Zealand, and why they would want to damage the grassroots and the future of the game to this extent, I don't know. For me, this opportunity is absolutely essential to New Zealand rugby, and if we don't take it, we're going to lag behind the rest of the world, because most of the major unions are entering into similar agreements with other major companies, and we would get left behind.
Laurie, the counter-argument might be that they're in fact protecting the future of rugby in New Zealand, raising concerns about a deal that they're not 100% on board with, and over who owns these rights in perpetuity. What's going to happen 10 years down the track if, for example, this company on-sells it to someone else who might not have the same good intentions that you think Silver Lake has? So maybe they're being the guardians of rugby.
No. Just totally reject that for two reasons. There is a separate company that is going to run New Zealand Rugby. That has nothing to do with the commercial company that has been set up to manage this account. And secondly, 12.5%, 2 directors on a 7 or 8 man board. What major influence can they have? If someone else comes along in 10 years' time and buys them out, they won't have a greater percentage. They'll still only have 12% and a minority on the commercial board of New Zealand Rugby. So how could they possibly do damage?
Have you ever seen a similar situation where these two groups, New Zealand Rugby and the players, are at, well, such odds with each other?
No, I haven't. But this would be the first major test that has come along. It's a test for New Zealand Rugby and it's a test for the players. And I shouldn't say the players, it's the Players Association board, and that's where the issue is, not necessarily with the professional players around New Zealand.
Don't you think their board is acting in their best interests and, well, doing what the players want the board to do?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that. I think that maybe the board doesn't understand the ramifications to New Zealand grassroots rugby if this deal does not go ahead. When you look at all of the bodies, New Zealand Rugby Union's got some highly skilled business people on that board. The Maori Rugby Board is satisfied with that it's going to assist with Maori rugby, and I hope it does. And down through all of the provinces, my understanding is that they all supported it, and certainly I know that club-level rugby need this support. Why the Players Association board wants to be at odds with all of those bodies, I cannot understand.
Is the answer money?
Look, it probably is, but I can't say that because I don't know.
Okay, so what would you say to the professional players here?
I would tell them to ask themselves where they came from in New Zealand rugby. Why are they privileged rugby players now? And then say, do we want to do any damage to the grassroots of New Zealand rugby? And I'll guarantee there's not one single player in New Zealand that would want to harm or deny opportunity to club rugby and provincial rugby. Now, I think that statement says an awful lot about where this opposition is coming from.
So, Laurie, what do you think that grassroots rugby looks like without the Silver Lake deal?
Well, it will undoubtedly continue to decline, and it is declining. We can't give the support, or New Zealand rugby, because we've come on pretty hard times with COVID and everything else, can't give the support at provincial level and club level and grassroots level that is needed to maintain the momentum to bring back the momentum of rugby at that level. Silver Lake have a number of ideas, which I can't repeat, a number of ideas how they can get into the homes of the children and the young players of New Zealand rugby and make it more entertaining and more acceptable to them. This company is very highly skilled, and New Zealand Rugby is incredibly fortunate to be in the position where they can cash in on that skill, let alone the bulk input of money. I think everybody understands that we have to get more money and support. And when I say money, it's not a matter of handing clubs money. It's a matter of providing personnel, quality personnel, to assist those clubs with their operations and to assist with coaching around the provinces. It's a really big deal. And if we don't get this through, it's going to be very hard for the New Zealand Rugby Union to go through with that.
Laurie, should the professional players have the veto power that they currently do?
No. They should have power to make decisions in areas that directly concern them. I would love to know how they managed to get this sort of power that they can veto something as major as this. But that's not the point. They've got it. They've got that veto. They've been given it somewhere along the line. And they need to be mature. They need to be mature and think about the whole of rugby in New Zealand, not just themselves.
Should this veto power, should it continue with the Players Association, or should they get rid of it out of the contract?
Well, you know something? When I see what they're up to over this issue, I don't think they should have that veto power. Because this is a major test for them, and so far, I think for the majority of those people that have a stake in All Black rugby from the past, part of the legacy, I never heard one former All Black in a number of meetings oppose the Silver Lake deal, apart from those that are on the board of the Players Association. But and we would not like to see a similar situation like this arise again. And if it means that they have to lose that veto power, then so be it.
Laurie Mains, former All Blacks player and coach there. It is almost 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the program, heartland unions are all for the Silver Lake deal. So what's the silver lining for them? Misinformation and isolation are being blamed for Northland's slow COVID-19 vaccine rollout. It's been revealed Northland is the worst performing DHB when it comes to distribution, falling short of its target by almost 4,000 doses. Kate Gregan reports.
For those on the ground, it's no surprise Northland's vaccination rates aren't where they should be. The chair of the Council of Medical Colleges, Dr John Bonning, says the rollout can be a logistical nightmare, especially in sparsely populated regions like Northland.
Look, there are some issues with the fact that the Pfizer needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees. Cold chain storage and getting it to rural and regional areas is a little bit more challenging. So we need to help and support people, take the vaccine out to our communities and support them to come into centres so they can receive it.
Northland family doctor Andrew Miller echoes those concerns. He says the model for the region's expected vaccine delivery may not be correct, and the size of the region alone is a huge challenge.
Most modelling in regards to Northland fails to understand the rurality of Northland, the distances we travel, the deprivation we have up here, and just how different it is in other parts of New Zealand. So if the model is correct and it's factored in all those things, maybe we are lagging, but I think there's other things in play in terms of just how difficult it is with such a spread out population, with such a limited workforce, to keep up with places that have got much better resourcing than we do.
As of Sunday night, Northland DHB had administered just 62% of its vaccine target. But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's defended the DHB, saying they're working through deployment issues.
Northland DHB is covering a widely dispersed, often rural and isolated communities. They're taking steps now, and they have the ability to take steps to try and increase their rate of vaccination. And we wanted that flexibility in our vaccine rollout so they can respond to those needs.
Northland iwi argue there's more to it. Tia Ashby is the Ngāpuhi Pandemic Response Project lead.
There have been instances where we've seen, misinformation spread about what is in the COVID-19 vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine. And if clear evidence-based information was actually given out to these communities, and I don't mean just through social media or via billboards at their public hospital, it actually needs to be either delivered into their mailbox or Māori providers distributing this information.
Ms Ashby says rollout shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. She says to improve vaccination rates, officials need to deliver information in a way that suits the Northland community.
There's some people that don't use social media, but they'll be on the phone, or there's some others that prefer mail, or others that may not trust the information that they're given if it's just put through one source.
And some information that's currently on the market isn't clear to some locals.
Sometimes people might put references in small writing at the bottom of a document, but, some of our kuia and kaumātua don't understand what that means. So you have to say, well, actually, it's been retrieved from here, and this means that a reputable scientist or team actually have studied this vaccine, and these were the outcomes.
Ms Ashby is now organising a number of hui to distribute information to the community. Dr Bonning agrees it's critical people receive the correct information about the vaccine, but says at times it's difficult.
I acknowledge vaccine hesitancy. There's quite a lot of misinformation out there, and I would seek to reassure people that are worried that this isn't something that's been rushed through. The technology that's gone into the Pfizer vaccine is in fact 30 years of research.
And says the more people get vaccinated, the stronger and safer New Zealanders will be.
The vaccine is Aotearoa New Zealand's only chance at gaining a degree of immunity to lessen the impact of this worldwide pandemic virus.
The nationwide vaccination program is slightly ahead of schedule. For Checkpoint, Kate Gregan.
Ho mai o whakaaro, we're really keen to hear from you. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program tonight, the Silver Lake deal or anything else. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, text us 2101, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Auckland's mayor has stepped in to try and get the Ports of Auckland to communicate with union bosses. The Maritime Union today appeared before the Auckland Council to discuss the recent health and safety report into the ports, which found systemic failings and profits being put ahead of safety. They say progress on any improvements is slow, and they're struggling to even get an email response from those at the top. Nita Blake-Person reports.
It's been just over a month since the release of a damning report into health and safety at Auckland's ports. At the time, Board Chair Bill Osborne promised swift action, but not everyone's convinced.
As yet, I haven't seen management at the ports of Auckland engaging in a positive fashion to fix this.
Maritime Union of New Zealand's Auckland Branch Secretary Russell Mains today speaking to Auckland councillors about what, if anything, has changed since the report came out.
The report having been released, I think, some 4 weeks ago. The health and safety manager down there, we haven't even met with you yet. And I would have thought that would have been one of the first things that's happened, especially given the criticism of both the port company and the union in the report of not being collaborative and working together.
That health and safety report was instigated by Auckland Council, which owns the ports, after 3 deaths were linked to the workplace in recent years. Since it was released, there has been another accident. That worker is still not back on the job. The report made 45 recommendations and was highly critical of ports management. It also highlighted issues with the fractured relationship between the ports and the union. But Russell Mains says they feel like they're playing their part and even invited the ports board to a recent stop work meeting with ports workers.
Unfortunately, the board never turned up, they never responded and never even told us they weren't coming. And it's a big call for a union to invite a chairperson and a board to their stop work meetings. It's not done casually. Secondly, following that, I have again tried to engage with the chairperson and the board. I've sent them a letter asking for an urgent meeting. I think it's some 5-6 days ago, and I still haven't even received a reply.
Mayor Phil Goff today said that's something the council could assist with.
I'm happy to make a call to the board to suggest that the engagement with the union would be very positive in terms and within the spirit of the recommendation.
News of the limited progress seemed to frustrate some councillors, including Kathy Casey.
This is very disappointing to hear. This council heard from the reviewers about the dysfunctional relationship between union and management and suggested that everybody put aside their differences for the sake of a new era, looking at the safety of our port workers. I thought that was going to happen. Indeed, I heard that was going to happen from the Chief Executive and from the Board Chair at their press conference later in the day after the Mayor.
Russell Main reiterated today the union's request to have a member on the port's health and safety team, but said that hadn't been warmly received.
If you're a company that's saying that you want to engage in the workforce and you want to bring health and safety back to the prominent position at the workplace, Why would you refuse to have a union official on your health and safety committee? Doesn't make sense to me, people, it really doesn't. All it says to me is, we don't want to engage with you, we'll do that as window dressing, but in the end you don't belong in a position where you can affect change in health and safety.
Phil Goff today said Construction Health and Safety New Zealand, which completed the initial report, would be carrying out an audit into how recommendations had been implemented in October. As for Ports of Auckland, Checkpoint has also not received any responses to emails put to Board Chair Bill Cashmore. And from Chief Executive Tony Gibson, we were told by a representative, no comment. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
Queen Street businesses are suing the council over a pedestrian trial, which they say has left Auckland's Main Street a disgrace. Barriers originally put in place for COVID-19 distancing were kept on by the council to trial a pedestrian-friendly street. Now, those opposing the changes are trying to put a stop to the council's plans to make them more permanent. Reporter Louise Tanous and camera operator Nick Munro filed this report.
Half painted black, half yellow, filthy, screws. I mean, who would do this? You wouldn't put it in your garage, to stop somebody driving into your garage, let alone putting it in the main street.
Property investor Andrew Crooksiner is not mincing his words when it comes to the state of Queen Street. He's got stakes in 3 properties and is the secretary of the Save Queen Street Society, which opposes Auckland Council's plans to pedestrianise the famous shopping strip. Andrew reckons the trial fails to encourage people to walk and is frustrating to vehicles.
The bus drivers hate it, the Uber drivers hate it, the couriers hate it. There are many tradespeople that will not come to Queen Street because they can't get a loading zone because council have taken most of the loading zones away. So, they've turned a perfectly operable street that had never been better pre the works into arguably the worst main street, if not certainly in New Zealand, maybe in the world.
This is an example of the issue. Plastic sticks and bollards that reduce Queen Street down to 2 tight lanes, leaving nowhere for businesses to pick up and drop off stock, customers to park, and taxis and Ubers to pick up and drop off. But Auckland Council has plans to get rid of the sticks and replace them with wide boardwalks, seating and planter boxes filled with native plants. Andrew Crooksiner says that's pretty, not practical.
The new makeover is lipstick on a pig. They're trying to make something pretty that doesn't work.
That's why he and the Save Queen Street Society are opposing the $1.1 million makeover plans and have applied for an injunction to stop it going ahead. They're not alone. About 80 small businesses, as well as Uber, taxi and delivery drivers, also object to the plans. Juliet Cardi from Q Clothing says Queen Street is already struggling without students and tourists, and the layout is exacerbating the issue.
It does restrict people from dropping off. If I need to collect stock from stores, then I, can't just automatically come in and park. So it is a bit difficult. So so it is restrictive for us as a business. Oh, I'd love to see them gone. Yeah, a lot of people bang into them with cars and everything, and it causes bangs and can scare people on the streets. So yeah, absolutely love to see them gone.
Sales assistant Josephine Williams from Korean beauty shop Hikoko agrees.
It affects our customers as well, just because they can't really get to our store properly. There's no parking on the street either. It is an eyesore, but I don't see the point of them at the moment really. So I would, definitely they should be gone by now, I feel like.
Replacing the barriers was meant to start next week. Mayor Phil Goff says legal action from the society is just slowing things down.
Well, ironically, they're due to be taken out next Monday, but an injunction by the property owners would prevent that happening, so it would be totally counterproductive.
While businesses say they don't want the street pedestrianised, he stands by the council's decision.
We don't want Queen Street to be an area that you simply drive through. We want Queen Street to be a good place to go to. And where we've pedestrianised in the past, like Fort Street, that has really helped the retail in those areas.
Viv Beck from the heart of the city is on the Save Queen Street Society committee. She echoes the enthusiasm to make Queen Street a great place, but says the new plans aren't catering to all users.
It not only has to look great and be a place people want to be, but it has to work. So the plans that have been released, we believe are really suboptimal.
The Save Queen Street Society will meet Council and Auckland Transport tomorrow to discuss future plans for the street before a court hearing next Wednesday. She's remaining hopeful they'll find a way forward.
Well, I'm an optimist. It has been an incredibly frustrating year, but I really hope that we can actually come to something that we can see as a positive way forward for the city, because we really genuinely think it's too important to get wrong.
For Checkpoint, Louise Tanuth.
Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei e our Checkpoint. The Heartland teams have given the Silver Lake deal the big thumbs up. So why? We speak to the boss of the Wanganui Union. The government's told to get social workers into emergency housing accommodation, and a campaign to save a pahutakawa tree that's accidentally dropped off the protected list. Ho mai o whakaaro. We'd love your feedback. Lots of you getting in touch about the rugby deal, proposed deal with Silver Lake. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz to let us know what you think. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The government received numerous warnings from officials that its major housing package could hurt vulnerable renters, but pressed ahead regardless. Newly released documents show the Housing Minister did seek advice on whether rent controls might help limit the pain, but was advised against it. The Ministry of Housing told ministers their grand plan could in fact drive up rents. Former All Blacks coach Laurie Mains says New Zealand Rugby could be left behind other nations if they do not accept the deal with private equity firm Silver Lake. Mr Mains told Checkpoint that the deal will grow the pot of money available to players, and he could not understand why their union was opposed to it. Provincial unions have unanimously approved the $387 million deal, but it also needs to be ratified by the Players' Union. The chair of the Council of Medical Colleges has defended the Northland DHB for its slow vaccination rollout. Northland had administered just 62% of its vaccine target as of Sunday night. Dr John Bonning says vaccine rollout can be a logistical nightmare, especially in sparsely populated regions like Northland. 8 people, including 2 from the Rotorua chapter of the Filthy Few Motorcycle Club, have been arrested, and police have disrupted plans to import hundreds of kilograms of cocaine from Mexico. The police and customs service searched 10 properties and a boat in Bay of Plenty, Northland and Auckland this morning. Auckland's mayor is intervening to improve communication between the Maritime Union and Ports of Auckland. Union bosses told an Auckland Council meeting today they had not heard back from the Ports Board after inviting them to a meeting where a recent health and safety report was to be discussed. The Mayor Phil Goff says he will be contacting the board. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoke mai. This is Checkpoint, and it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, Infertile is increasing its presence in healthcare.
Yeah, Infertile, the infrastructure investor, probably best known for owning big stakes in the likes of Wellington Airport, Vodafone and Trustpower, but in the past 6 months it's identified healthcare as a sector that it really wants to increase its presence in. About 6 months ago it purchased an Australian diagnostics company, and today it announced that it's poised to take a controlling stake in the local diagnostics firm Pacific Radiology for up to $350 million. It's the biggest firm of its kind in the country. It has well over 40 clinics, employs about 90 radiologists. Most of its presence is in the South Island and lower North Island. And sort of the thinking behind this for Infertile is, well, there's a couple of key reasons. One is healthcare. It's seen as a defensive investment. This is a company that invests in a wide range of things, but healthcare, people are always going to look after themselves, and it's likely to be one of those things that doesn't sort of ebb and flow as sort of consumer demand does for various other services. The other is that with our ageing population, demand for sort of X-rays and CT scans are only likely to increase in the future, so the company sees some real opportunities for growth here. The other thing that's sort of going to help this company as it moves into this space, which they probably didn't foresee, was the government's health announcement last year, this focus on sort of primary health care, preventative health. Well, that's likely to see more people getting screenings and those sorts of things. That's likely to help the business. And Infertile, look, by its own admission, they love to talk about the fact that they identify sort of areas for investment well before the market does, and they feel like they're onto a winner right now with healthcare and diagnostics at the moment. The company will soon have about $1 billion war chest. That's after it completes the sale of its stake in Tilt renewables, and it will be tipped to go out into the market and snap up more businesses. So as always with this firm, watch this space. And today its share price closed up about 5 cents to $7.05 per share.
So, business confidence has perked up. Who says?
This is the ANZ Bank, and it's likely down to our newly minted Trans-Tasman travel bubble. And this has been indicated in the bank's latest survey of business confidence. It shows pessimism over the past month has decreased. But one of the key sort of positive signs here is that firms, a net 22% of firms are sort of expecting better times in the future, which is actually the highest rating we've seen in this particular measure in about 3 years' time. The key concerns, though, like this report does cover sort of sentiment for businesses, the various challenges they're facing, and one of the concerns that businesses are making noises about around those cost pressures, the familiar culprit being supply chain disruptions, but also the competition for skilled staff. There are shortages in certain parts of the labour market, and that's likely to drive up, costs for businesses, and some are saying that they're unlikely to be able to pass those on to consumers, so that will likely trim their margins, their profitability margins. But the ANZ Bank, in prior reports, it's talked about how the economy in 2021, economic growth, is likely to go sideways. And they put that down to the fact that the rebound in spending we saw coming out of lockdown, that's going to lose momentum. It's already beginning to. We've seen signs of that. But also we're going to feel the bite of lost international tourism. But it points to some of the more positive signs in this survey. Things like firms saying that they're going to look to invest more and hire more staff as evidence that may be challenging that view. It may be a bit too early for the bank to sort of revise that forecast, but a few sort of positive signs that things may be looking a bit rosier. I think one of the key pieces of data to look out for next week will be when we get the Q1 labour market statistics from Stats NZ.
Okay, well, what numbers do you bring from the market?
The NZX is up 69 points to 12,715. The dollar is at 72.6 US cents and 93.1 Australian.
Kia ora. Thank you, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with Business. The government was repeatedly warned by officials its massive housing shake-up could hurt vulnerable renters, resulting in rent hikes or overcrowding. Newly released documents show the Housing Minister sought advice on whether rent controls might be a solution, but was advised not to proceed. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, has been wading through the documents.
It was under intense public pressure last month that the government announced its Housing Bazooka, a suite of policies to cool the red-hot property market.
There is no one silver bullet, so we are pulling all of the levers we have.
And they looked at a whole lot of levers. Screeds of documents released today show just what was on the table. Ministers got advice on a possible stamp duty, a Kiwi Build expansion, even the prospect of compulsory land acquisition to break up land banking. In the end, none of those ideas featured in the government's plan. It settled instead on doubling the bright line test and stopping property investors from writing off interest costs. The income and price caps for the first home grant were lifted too.
We are trying to tilt the playing field towards first home buyers.
But the documents today show both Treasury and Ministry officials had strong reservations about aspects of the plan.
What this advice shows us today is that the most probable outcome from all of this is an increase in rents, which is likely to affect those with the fewest options, lower income tenants, and may well lead to an increase in the number of people living in motels in New Zealand.
National's housing spokesperson Nicola Willis says the advice backs up what the opposition has long said, that renters will fare worst. The Housing Ministry told ministers most landlords would consider increasing rent to cover the higher costs. Stressed renters already at their financial limit could crowd together in smaller houses, and if landlords sold up, renters might be turfed out and left in a precarious spot. Treasury warned that any rent pressure would hit Māori and Pacific people hardest, young people too.
The scary thing is ministers received this advice and they went ahead anyway.
The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, refused an interview today, but the documents show she sought advice in December as to whether temporary rent controls could limit any impact. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, later warned of potential action if there were large rent hikes. He wouldn't give an interview today either. Renters United spokesperson Ashok Jacob says it is high time they put a cap on the amount landlords can put up rent.
If they are the government that they say they are, then they're already aware of how much people are hurting on the ground. The fact that rents have gone up so much in the past few years despite favourable financial conditions should show the government that there actually needs to be controls on rent increases.
It's an abysmally stupid idea. There are much better things that the government can and should be looking at.
Brad Olsen is a senior economist and director at Infometrics. He's encouraged the government hasn't gone down the track of using rent controls and would advise it to steer clear.
International evidence highlights time and time again that rent controls limit the supply of new rental housing, lock in people into housing for a much longer period of time, and see those outside of rent controls, often in new builds, pay a much higher rent than they otherwise would.
The Housing Ministry also advised against rent controls for similar reasons. For now, the prospect looks to be off the agenda. But if rents continue their skyward rise, the government's appetite may change. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
A bit of your feedback now. This is on our interview with Laurie Mains in the Silver Lake deal generally. Jean's got in touch to say, Silver Lake and New Zealand grassroots rugby sounds like a dichotomy. This is selling out what New Zealand rugby and its inherent problems should be solving themselves without a sell, even at 12.5%, says Jean. Colin says you can be sure that selling off 1/8 of the All Blacks is just the beginning. I rue the loss of when they truly represented our country. Now it's about who they can buy in. I played in my school team in the 60s and I valued the sense that we represented our local district. Colin says that's all gone, and as a consequence I have largely lost interest in rugby. And this from another listener. The commercial naivety of the rugby union is breathtaking. 12% and 2 board members means you can control the board. This is about money, 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 with only the profits coming back to New Zealand. No profit, no return, they say. Keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or our email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A social housing provider says it is ridiculous the government is not already providing social workers for everyone living in emergency accommodation. The Prime Minister today indicated a commitment to ramping up wraparound support for those living in motels. Advocates say motel owners shouldn't be paying social workers to tenants with high needs, and they're urging the government to plug the gap. Hamish Cardwell has more.
Demand for emergency accommodation has exploded in recent years, with the government now spending nearly $1 million a day to put people up. 8,500 people are living in motels and other temporary accommodation, some in conditions one of the government's own ministers describes as inhumane. Many tenants have complex mental health and addiction issues, and crime and intimidation is rife in some places.
It's certainly a moral failure, because we know if the government had the fortitude to make the change, they would. It needs the government to commit to every family in every motel across the country having social work support.
Bernie Smith from the Monte Cecilia Housing Trust says the fact not everyone in emergency accommodation gets wraparound help right now is ridiculous. The Prime Minister says some are getting support and the government is looking to boost it. Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says currently wraparound help is provided according to need.
We need to continually monitor whether or not we are getting to enough families and providing families with the support they need. Some move into emergency accommodation and out relatively quickly, but there certainly are a number who do need wraparound support.
But Bernie Smith says people should not be forced to ask for help. He says the government has had 4 years to come up with a plan, and he wants action now.
We're actually creating a generation of homeless children who are not only homeless and in poverty, but sadly in generations to come are going to be in our mental health and penal institutions because we haven't looked after them today, and it's not good enough in New Zealand.
John O'Bell from the Salvation Army says work needs to be done to find out how many people are missing out on the help they need.
Some people are getting the support, but others aren't. And our question would be, what is that ratio? What are the numbers that aren't getting that support? And how do we ensure that we could ramp up services to ensure that we'll be able to provide that wraparound support?
The PSA union represents social services workers. Its spokesperson Alistair Reith says social workers are already under the pump and the government will need to front cash to get wider support to those in emergency accommodation.
If you talk to pretty much any social worker in New Zealand, they'll say they have a lot to do and not enough time to do it. So it's definitely possible, but if this workforce are already stretched thin, then they'll need more resources and more funding to do it.
Mr Reith says rather than lining the pockets of motel owners, the government needs to finance and build more social housing. Carmel Sepuloni says the government is committed to building 18,000 new social houses by 2024 to ease the pent-up demand. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell aho.
It's 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muri ake e ngā pitapita kōrero. After this 6 o'clock news, we'll speak to the boss of the Whanganui Rugby Union on why she's supporting the Silver Lake deal. A woman who shot and killed her partner thinking he was an intruder trying to steal her cannabis has been sentenced to 9 months home detention. Amy Smith was found guilty of the manslaughter of her partner of 12 years, Danny Taylor, on a rural property northwest of Auckland in April 2019. His family say their lives have been ripped apart as Smith, who is said to be genuinely remorseful, cried in the dock. Jordan Bond reports.
Amy Smith and Danny Taylor lived on his farm in South Head, northwest of Auckland. In April 2019, they found out someone was planning to raid their property and steal their cannabis crop. Smith was on methamphetamine at the time too. And early the next morning, she thought the intruders had arrived, as Justice Peters outlined.
There was actually never much dispute at trial about what occurred. You believed an intruder was inside the house. And then thinking the intruder was coming towards you, you fired. The shot that you fired into the darkness hit Mr. Taylor in his left arm. The bullet went through his arm, through his ribcage and into his heart, causing his death.
She called 111, telling the call taker, "I've just shot my partner." Justice Peters said by the time an ambulance arrived, Taylor was dead and Smith was hysterical. In the trial, her defence was one of self-defence, and the jury accepted that she did not intentionally kill him. Today, she was crying throughout the sentencing, looking down, looking at her family and supporters, and at Taylor's family. Danny's daughter, Ali Grobin, spoke lovingly about her father.
He taught me how to ride my bike without training wheels. He taught me to drive my car. And if he was here, he could be the granddad I knew he was excited to be. But he never got to spend quality time with my eldest son and never got to meet my youngest and will never get to meet our new baby. And it's not only them who will miss out, but it's me too.
Danny's mother said it was the worst news a parent could get, and since then has been a living nightmare. Smith's lawyer, Susan Gray, said she is genuinely remorseful and since then has turned her life around, kicking her addiction to drugs and successfully studying. The drug rehab centre she spent time at said they'd take her back as a staff member. Justice Peters factored into her decision that Smith had already spent 9 months in prison after the shooting and 12 months on electronically monitored bail.
This case has been a tragedy for the Taylor family, but it has also been a tragedy for you. You and Mr. Taylor appear to have been soulmates, and I accept that you would turn back the clock if you possibly could, not for your own sake, but because it would bring him back to his family.
To this, Smith nodded emphatically through tears. In determining her sentence, Justice Peters gave Smith discounts due to remorse, offering to plead guilty to manslaughter, rehabilitation efforts and good behaviour on bail. The judge ended at a sentence of 9 months home detention and 400 hours of community work. Atuiti ko te matua I Tamaki Makoto for Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
There are less than 3 months until tens of thousands of athletes and officials are set to arrive in Japan for the Olympic Games. But it's anxiety more than excitement that's gripped the capital, Tokyo. The country's in the grip of a fourth wave of COVID infections. However, organisers remain confident the Games can be held safely. The ABC's Jake Sturmer reports.
At Tokyo's new Olympic and Paralympic aquatic venue, organisers are holding a para-swimming test to check everything like COVID safety measures, including the exact path athletes will take in and out of the centre to minimise contact. They'll also be a diving qualification event here this weekend. But Australia's team won't be here because Tokyo doesn't feel safe enough for them right now. A state of emergency is in place until May the 11th, and this week the country's death toll passed 10,000. Around 80% of those fatalities occurred in the past 5 months. Professor Koji Wada is a government advisor on the pandemic and says the country is now in a fourth wave.
In Western Japan, there are many patients in a serious condition, and it's also difficult to accept regular patients who need treatment after traffic accidents or suffering strokes. It's heartbreaking for the medical people as they're unable to save lives which could be saved.
Hospitals are trying to increase bed capacity in response. At the Tama Hospital in Kanagawa, which neighbours Tokyo, head nurse Hatsumi Kikuchi says she feels the number of patients is rising at a record pace. She says she needs more staff. They'd like help, she says, from other local government areas, but that would also put them under strain. In the meantime, this week, Olympic and Paralympic organisers revealed they were trying to secure 500 nurses to provide medical care during the event. They ultimately want 10,000 doctors and nurses staffing venues, but it's proving to be a major challenge for the already strained medical system. Overnight, organisers released more details about their COVID countermeasures, including daily testing of athletes so they can avoid a 14-day quarantine, limiting their movement to the Olympic Village, training and competition venues, but they've delayed a decision on whether or not to allow domestic fans until June. The president of the organising committee is Seiko Hashimoto, who's speaking through a translator.
Health must be protected. That is the grand premise. So safe and security must be prioritized in our games. As of now, full stadium is a tall order. I know, I understand it.
Tokyo had the Olympics cancelled in 1940 due to the outbreak of World War II. Its government and organisers are desperate to make sure the pandemic doesn't derail it in 2021. But with 3 months to go, there's still a lot of uncertainty.
A big Pahutakawa tree in the Auckland suburb of Mount Eden is at risk after the council left it off its protected tree schedule. The community is petitioning the authority to protect the century-old native and is calling for the mistake to be fixed, Carmina Blewett reports.
Pahutakawa trees were traditionally on a protected list, but this big one in Mount Eden has fallen off it. It's on a property on a suburban street, set just back from the road.
They've got the balance all wrong. By removing the tree protection rules, they've killed a flea with a sledgehammer, and we need some balance. We just need council to step up and do something.
That's Tree Council board member and landscape architect Mike Lockhart, frustrated with the Auckland Council leaving the Mount Eden Pahutakawa at risk of being felled. Last week, he started a petition to see safeguards reinstalled for the tree after it lost its protected status during the Unitary Plan rollover. He says the risk of the 100-year-old landmark's removal is unreasonable. He calls it a community icon with a lot of life left in it.
If they remove this tree, it's an incredibly negative thing to do to a community. I can't think of any other trees in Mount Eden that are bigger than this tree, and this tree is exceptional. I've spoken to arborists about it, and the tree has an amazing form. There's very little dead wood in it. It's incredibly healthy, and to add to that, it sits on this natural volcanic outcrop.
Auckland Council admits human error likely resulted in the Pahutakawa being left off the list, but it says it's unlikely to undergo a formal process to reverse the error. Changes to the Resource Management Act largely removed blanket tree protection over 5 years ago. But Head of Parks, Mark Bowater, says the council's still committed to protecting trees.
So we're doing a lot of work as a result of the strategy to look at what the council can control and influence. And in particular, that means what we can do on publicly owned land. So the focus of the strategy at the moment is about increasing urban cover on public land.
The council says the tree is not under threat because no one has applied for resource consent for development. But the tenant who lives at the property is worried the century-old Pahutakawa will go when the house is set for demolition, probably around July.
We had a message from our property manager just saying that they wanted to have someone evaluate the cost of trimming the tree because it was a safety hazard, which I could definitely recognise that it isn't a safety hazard, and that potentially this was the beginning of them trying to action a plan because they knew that they were going to develop eventually. Shortly thereafter, we got served notice for demolition.
After living at the address for around 5 years, the tenant, who asked to remain anonymous, thought the tree was protected until passing admirers alerted her to its unprotected status. Now she wants the community landmark kept where it is and for the council to stick to their original schedule.
It already had position of being protected, and I think that they should honour that. I mean, I'm not quite sure about what those processes are, and I understand that in most cases they can be very lengthy, but like I said before, it's once it's gone, it's gone.
The council's assurances are not enough for the 1,000+ people backing the petition, with several describing it as incompetence and a failure. Mike Lockhart says while he's lost faith in the council, the battle's not over, and he hopes the property owner will be open to discussions.
The fight doesn't stop here. I am flabbergasted that the council are so cold-blooded and callous about this. I really want to work with the owner. I think that's really important. I would like to think that they have some compassion and a moral compass. So we'll just keep on fighting.
The owner couldn't be contacted, and the property manager declined to comment. Ko Carmina Blewett, TNA.
And if you want to check out the video that goes with Carmina's story, we will put it on our Facebook page. Some of your feedback now on the Silver Lake deal and our interview with Laurie Mains. This person says not a single word from New Zealand Rugby or Laurie Mains about what the fans want. Are they totally ignorant to the fact that 100% of rugby's income comes from either directly or indirectly from the fans? And so soon after the football fiasco in Europe. Michael has got in touch, a lot of capital letters in his text. Why should the players' representatives not have a veto over such a critical deal for rugby? Who but the players are rugby, says Michael. Keith reckons New Zealand Rugby have done such a bad job they need a bailout, obviously. How convenient for them. A US company sees a chance to get a foot in the door, then take control.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa aho. The partial sale of the All Blacks brand took another step today with the New Zealand Rugby AGM giving it their unanimous support. However, as Barry Guy reports, the completion of the deal could still be some time off.
The delegates at the AGM in Wellington gave their full backing to the $387.5 million deal with US private equity firm Silver Lake. However, New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association remain in mediation over the split of the money. Chairman Brent Impey said it would be a terrible mistake if the players didn't eventually support this deal. However, All Blacks hooker Dane Cole says it's not just about the money and they won't rush into making a decision that they may regret in the future. New Zealand Rugby has also reported an $18.7 million loss for the last financial year. This is Barry Guy.
The National Party is accusing the government of ignoring advice that rent prices will go up due to its housing package. The government today publicly released advice and cabinet papers in the lead-up to last month's housing changes. National's housing spokesperson Nicola Willis says the advice was crystal clear that the measures the government was considering would increase rents and rent controls may need to be looked at. She says the advice shows the government was in reactive firefighter mode rather than getting to the nub of the problem, which is housing supply. A social housing provider is demanding the government provide wraparound support to everyone living in emergency accommodation. The Prime Minister today indicated a commitment to ramping up support for those living in motels. Bernie Smith from the Monte Cecilia Housing Trust says the government has had 4 years to come up with a plan and he wants action now.
It's certainly a moral failure because we know if the government had the fortitude to make the change, they would. It needs the government to commit to every family in every motel across the country having social work support.
The government spends nearly $1 million a day to house people in temporary accommodation. New Zealand is to give Fiji enough AstraZeneca doses to vaccinate 250,000 people. The vaccines will come from New Zealand's domestic vaccine supply. Fiji will also receive $2 million to support its rollout. Associate Foreign Affairs Minister Aupito William-Sio says the vaccine should be delivered in the third quarter of this year. The vaccine still has to be approved by MedSafe before it can be donated to Fiji. 2 new cases yesterday raised the local outbreak to 26 cases, and there are fears the Fijian health system won't cope if the outbreak escalates further. US President Joe Biden has unveiled a federal investment package worth more than $2 trillion in education, childcare and paid family leave. Labelled the American Families Plan, Mr Biden says corporate America will pay for the plan by doubling the tax rate on incomes above $1 million.
Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. How do we pay for my jobs and family plan? It's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share.
Joe Biden was speaking in his first address to a joint US Congress one day before he reaches 100 days in office. A British doctor says he's set to leave New Zealand because he cannot apply for residence. Kapiti GP Harding Richards arrived in 2018 and took the first step to residence and expression of interest last March. But the government stopped looking at any of those applications when the pandemic started and has given no sign when it might restart. Thousands of people are affected by that decision. Dr Richards says his Otaki practice serves a high needs area and he wants to stay.
The fact that Immigration New Zealand keep moving the goalposts, keep saying, oh, wait a bit longer, it just means that we're not able to have any certainty about timeline for the future.
Harding Richards says he and his partner cannot buy a house without residence and they have started looking at a move to Canada. Auckland's mayor has had to intervene to improve communication between Ports of Auckland and the Maritime Union. Speaking at an Auckland Council meeting today, union bosses said they had not heard back from the Ports Board after inviting them to a meeting where a recent health and safety report was to be discussed. Phil Goff says he will contact the board about the issue. He says the council is committed to improving health and safety at the Ports of Auckland, which has been linked to 3 deaths in recent years. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Joseph Parker's new trainer Andy Lee believes they've fixed a crucial flaw in the New Zealand boxer's skill set ahead of his fight against British veteran Derek Chisora. Having split with longtime mentor Kevin Barry, Parker has teamed up with Lee for Sunday's heavyweight clash in Manchester. The Irish former middleweight world champion says they've been working hard on Parker's punching technique.
There's no right way, there's no wrong way, but to me it wasn't the right way he was doing it. The way he's doing it now, he's got a lot more power. He's transferring his weight when he punches. I just saw basic things that weren't being done correctly. Any of the best fighters, they do the basics to a high degree.
Joseph Parker's trainer, Andy Lee. Silverstone will be the first circuit to trial Formula One's new sprint qualifying format. Under the new format, a qualifying session will be held after the first Friday practice to determine the grid for a sprint race on Saturday. The finishing order of the sprint, which at 100 kilometres will be about a third of a normal race distance and last about half an hour without mandatory pit stops, will determine Sunday's starting grid. Turkey will replace Canada on this year's Formula One calendar after the June race in Montreal was cancelled for the second year in a row due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Manchester City have taken a big step towards their first Champions League title with a 2-1 away win over last year's runners-up Paris Saint-Germain in the semi-final first leg. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, what is deeply human about menopause? Series host Dessa finds out how it affected her grandmother. Alison Balance revisits her investigation into Cody dieback. Motoko Kakubayashi is on the line from Japan. And Samuel Martin Treseño has the facts behind the fiction of the Arnie action movie Total Recall. Could we ever terraform a breathable atmosphere on Mars? That's on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine or becoming fine tonight. A few light showers tomorrow, mainly in the west. Waitomotu, Manawatu, including Taumaranui and Taihape. Fine with cloudy periods and isolated showers developing from tonight. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne to Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough. Fine weather, cloud developing in the south from tomorrow afternoon. For Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, fine at first, cloud and showers spreading from the south tomorrow afternoon and evening. Bulla and Westland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow afternoon. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain or drizzle for Fiordland and coastal parts of Southland and Clutha. Rain throughout tomorrow morning, possibly thundery in Fiordland, followed by fine spells with isolated showers. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen toku ingoa. The message from grassroots rugby to the professional players is clear. Get on board with the Silver Lake deal. All 26 unions and the Māori Rugby Board approved plans to sell a 12.5% stake in New Zealand Rugby's commercial rights to US equity firm Silver Lake. The deal's worth more than $380 million. But the deal is still not complete because the professional players are blocking it and mediation is at a stalemate. Bridget Beltram is the CEO of Wanganui Rugby and Group Chair of Heartland Rugby. She says they like what they see and that's why they're for it, boots and all.
Rugby's facing some challenges, so we need money to invest in the game and development of the game. So, yeah, we're excited about the opportunities to grow rugby in our regions.
So specifically, what do you get out of it?
The finer details of that is still being worked through. I mean, we have had some communication about that, but that's not public knowledge at this point. But I mean, it's not just about that. I mean, Heartland Regions, we're a financially sustainable organisation, so it's about the long-term future of our sport and each of our provincial unions, and we cover off a significant number of clubs and schools. So, it's an opportunity for us to grow the sport. Opportunity to help our clubs. They need an upgrading of facilities. The opportunities possibly for that. There's more women participating. We're all needing to, refurb facilities in order to cater for our women participants. So, there's lots of opportunities that we can develop the game and secure the long-term future.
New Zealand Rugby's indicated there's $39 million to be handed around. Were you told how much of that you would get before you went to this vote?
Yeah, we did. I'll be honest about that. Yeah, we did. But that's still being worked through.
So they gave you a figure, Bridget. Just to be clear, they gave you a figure to what you specifically would get, your union.
Yes, we did.
So is it $1 million?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not privy to discuss that. But no, it's not.
And as you understand it, did every club every union get told what they would get?
Yes, we've had an indication. There's the finer details of that is still being worked through.
Is the money being split up evenly?
It's evenly, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say evenly amongst both levels of the game, but we, as Heartland Unions, we've fully supported the deal based on our contribution to the game. So we're happy with it, otherwise we wouldn't have voted for it.
The reason I'm asking is I'm curious to know how much detail you got before you had to make your decision. So aside from knowing how much money you might get in the first round of funding, what have they told you about future years and what investment they will make in you?
Yeah, I mean, we're heavily funded from New Zealand Rugby. So, as we all know, we had significant cuts of funding from New Zealand Rugby last year due to COVID, and Heartland Unions made the really difficult decision to actually cancel our championship last year, and we did that because we wanted to ensure that we existed going into the future. Because of cost of a championship, we wanted to make sure that our club and our key people were a priority, so we made that decision last year based on that. With regards to the Silver Lake deal, we know that there's money to come to us, and we know that that's what we need to secure the future of the game.
Is it guaranteed? The figure that they gave you before you went to the vote, are you absolutely guaranteed to get that? if the Silver Lake deal goes through?
It was part of the resolution, the wording in the resolution. So there is, like you said, $39 million to be distributed among stakeholders. I'm not privy to share that with you, but it has, and it was part of the resolution. I think there is some stories online of actually the wording around that.
So the breakdown, Bridget, the $39 million, yep, that's in the resolution, but the breakdown of who gets what, was that laid out on the table and you signed up to that as well? Or are you just trusting you're going to get the number that they told you?
We've got details. I mean, NZ has done their due diligence and they've needed to share a certain amount of details in order for us to make the decision that's right for us as provincial unions. And when we went out a few weeks ago supporting the deal, we have had an indication of what that distribution is likely to look like. And there is the legacy fund as well, which is an opportunity for us for key community rugby initiatives to be invested in long term. So I mean, there's lots of positives around this deal, and it's not just about an amount of money that we may get in a year's time or whatever that time frame is. It's about the long-term funding that we will get as provincial unions in order to secure the game in each of our regions. And every rugby player starts in a provincial union, clubs, schools. So we are key. We are the custodians of the game in our communities. And clubs are a huge part of our communities. It's not just about rugby, it's about the family environment and everything else that sport can provide to everyone. So, yeah, I mean, from our point of view, 26 unions wouldn't have voted for it if we didn't believe it was in the best interest of the game to vote for it.
You believe it is in the best interests of the game, and as you say, all of these unions voted for it on that basis. Why do you think that the professional players can't see the same value?
I mean, the RPA are there to look out for the professional players. From a Heartland perspective, I'm speaking on our players, and our players are club rugby players and amateur players. We don't deal in Heartland regions directly with professional players. So that's probably a question you need to ask for Mitre 10 or just New Zealand Rugby.
Do you think that those professional players need to get on board with this deal?
Oh, I mean, they have their reasons, Lisa. They're working through, as you know, there's been the mediation, and NZ will still have those discussions with them. We're confident that, hopefully they'll come to a resolution and this deal will proceed. But,
But they're stopping it happening at the moment, Bridget, and you have just said all of the unions see value in this, that Heartland Rugby needs it to grow and improve, and you're struggling without it, right? But you can't get it across the line without them. So what do you think they should do? What is your message to them?
I mean, NZR has, like I said, been through this mediation with them. They have their reasons and they've presented their case, in the last few weeks and over the last, few months even. So, I mean, they have their reasons for it. I'm really hoping they do come on board because, like I said, every single All Black, every single professional rugby player starts in our 26 provincial unions. And if we can't sustain the game in our regions, our sport is in trouble. We need our clubs, we need our schools, we need the teenage participants, we need the Māori Pacifica participants, we need all our participants, the women. We need to grow the game in order to have successful teams on the international stage.
Do you think it would be a mistake on their part not to get on board?
Yeah, I do, 100%. Yep.
So you're really asking them to change their minds, aren't you, Bridget?
We are. I mean, they haven't given a final decision on that. NZ are still working through that, and I haven't been party to the mediation details. But we've got trust in hopefully NZR to work through RPA's concerns around it, and they get the tick of approval. Hopefully the strong message that we've put out today, as a community game, which is where it all starts, is needs the funding, needs this money to grow the game, and I'm hoping that they will come to an agreement.
Bridget Baltram, the CEO of Wanganui Rugby and the Group Chair of Heartland Rugby. Let's head to the US now, and President Joe Biden has made his first speech to a joint US Congress on the eve of his 100th day in office. The president touted the country's post-pandemic economic recovery, saying America is on the move again.
100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available.
Along with addressing gun reform, immigration, climate change and terrorism, the President unveiled an education, childcare and families package worth more than $2 trillion. Despite Mr Biden declaring America is back, the recovery isn't reaching everyone. The BBC's Samira Hussein reports.
As the COVID-19 pandemic shows signs of receding, America's economy is staging a tremendous comeback, helped massively by the Biden administration's unprecedented spending.
I did get a stimulus check, and I took my wife away to Mexico.
I spent it on my rent. Yeah, on bills and stuff. I didn't really take a vacation or anything. It all went towards, paying all my bills, and it wasn't enough.
Actually, my wife and I bought a dishwasher.
Pretty much just used it for rent. I've been, I haven't really been working much.
By putting money directly into the hands of Americans, the government has ensured an increase in consumer spending. People are feeling confident about the economy going forward.
When we invest in the American people, it's not just those at the top that make our economy grow. They're the ones that make it grow, ordinary Americans. We saw the economy gain traction in March as the American Rescue Plan moved and got passed, bringing new hope to our country.
But the economic recovery has not reached huge numbers of people. Just look at the lineup at this New York City food bank.
For a lot of the folks that we serve and a lot of the folks that are now coming on our pantry lines that are still dealing with unemployment, it's not getting better for them.
The uneven nature of the recovery is a big reason why the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, is keeping its policy of easy money.
The sectors of the economy most adversely affected by the pandemic remain weak, but have shown improvement. While the recovery has progressed more quickly than generally expected, it remains uneven and far from complete.
A key metric for getting the American economy back to pre-pandemic levels is getting more people vaccinated.
Since day one of the pandemic, the course of the virus determined the course of the economy, and we cannot emphasize enough how important vaccinations are to unleashing. You could pour a lot of money into the economy and buy a lot more goods, but that doesn't unleash and restore the pent-up demand in services and restore the jobs that were lost.
So having been tipped into a recession by the coronavirus, the U.S. is now heading towards a boom. It will need to be a long one to fix all of COVID's economic damage, and the pandemic will have to go away.
Samira Hussein with that report. It is almost 21 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Indian variant of COVID-19 is being partly blamed for the deadly surge of cases there. India's now reported 80 million infections, with 360,000 recorded in the past 24 hours alone. That trajectory is mirrored in the deaths, with more than 3,000 in the last day. Making matters worse, it's unclear how widespread and dangerous the new variant is. The BBC's Rebecca Morrell reports.
The death toll keeps on rising as India struggles to cope with its COVID crisis. But how did they get to this point? And are variants behind the surge in cases? Since April, India has reported 5 million COVID infections. Each day is bringing record numbers. But are changes to the virus causing this explosive growth? or people's behaviour?
It's always a combination of things. The increase in social mixing that's happened over the last several months, the sort of dropping of the guard of people thinking that they can go back to being normal, as well as the potentially the variants that have emerged.
So how is the virus mutating? And what do we know about the variants? The picture is different in different parts of the country. In Delhi and Punjab, the UK variant is dominant. It has a mutation to the spike of the virus that allows it to enter cells more easily, so it can infect more people. But in Maharashtra and West Bengal, a new Indian variant has emerged. It has two key mutations. Lab studies suggest it's slightly more infectious, but less so than the UK variant. But the changes may mean that antibodies find it harder to block the virus. But scientists need to assess how much immunity is lost.
Rebecca Morrell with that report. And to the UK, where there will be an official investigation into how Boris Johnson funded the renovation of his Downing Street flat. The inquiry will be carried out by the Electoral Commission, which says there's reason to believe the rules may not have been followed. The British Prime Minister insists he paid for the work himself and complied with the Code of Conduct. The BBC's Laura Koonsberg reports.
There's no place like home.
Are you worried about the investigation, Prime Minister?
And there's been no fix quite like this for Boris Johnson before.
Who coughed up for the flat, sir?
His flats had an expensive makeover. He won't say who first paid. A mystery that's now subject to a serious investigation. But the Electoral Commission today said, we are now satisfied there are reasonable grounds to suspect that an offence or offences may have occurred. With claims that Tory donors might have picked up the tab, the suspicion the rules were broken.
Initially is the key word here. Who initially paid for the redecoration of his Downing Street flat?
He should know that I paid for Downing Street refurbishment personally, Mr. Speaker. Any further declaration that I have to make, I will, if any, I will be advised upon by Lord Geit.
Lord Geit used to work for the Queen, and he'll now watch over ministers' behaviour. But remember, the question isn't who stumped up in the end. It's who paid Boris Johnson's bills at the start.
What do we get from this Prime Minister and this Conservative government? Dodgy contracts, jobs for their mates and cash for access. And who's at the heart of it? The Prime Minister, Major Sleaze, sitting there. Don't the British people deserve a Prime Minister they can trust and a government that isn't mired in sleaze, cronyism and scandal?
Week after week, the people of this country can see the difference between a Labour Party that twists and turns with the wind, that thinks of nothing except playing political games, whereas this party gets on with delivering on the people's priorities.
This isn't about spending cash on cushions or curtains. It's about where the money came from to do so at the start. All politicians have to declare any money or loans they receive so that we can all be absolutely sure precisely what's going on. But the Prime Minister appears to be feeling the heat now on several fronts. Angry denials down there were the order of the day. Did the Prime Minister rage he'd rather see bodies pile up than lock down again? As several sources familiar with the exchanges have told the BBC and other news organisations.
Can the Prime Minister tell the House categorically, yes or no, did he make those remarks or remarks to that effect?
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker, and I think that if he's going to repeat allegations like that, he should come to this House and substantiate those allegations.
Parliamentary rules stop me from saying that the Prime Minister has repeatedly lied to the public over the last week. But can I ask the question? Are you a liar, Prime Minister?
I didn't say those words. What I do believe is that a lockdown is a miserable, miserable thing. And I did everything I could to try to protect the British public throughout the pandemic, to protect them from lockdowns, but also to protect them from disease.
Yet the Prime Minister's opponents are trying to peck away at Boris Johnson's integrity. And at the very least, unanswered questions are a big distraction.
Laura Koonsberg reporting. A Christmas miracle in April. 4-year-old twins in the city of Liberal in the US state of Kansas released a balloon with a wish list to Santa in December. Last week, a stranger 965 kilometres away found that balloon. CNN's Alan Terhune reports.
This story starts in Liberal, Kansas back in December when 4-year-old Luna Gonzalez and her twin Janella let go of a balloon attached a wish list for Santa.
Never expected anything to come out of just letting a balloon go and having my girls just send a letter to Santa.
But little did the family know someone would find that balloon.
I was deer hunting. I went to my other stand to check it out, and I saw the balloon in a treetop.
More than 600 miles away in Louisiana, Alvin Bamberg says God told him to take a closer look.
It was both girls' Christmas list and their wishes. Their mom had limited it to 4 items.
And right then and there, he decided to be Santa's helper, first posting the balloon and the note on Facebook to eventually find the girls who released it. Then he started gathering the gifts.
Friends, family, co-workers, old schoolmates, everybody just pitched in.
He then mailed the girls the presents.
He took the time out of his day while he was hunting just to go and grab it and see what it was. It caught his eye, and he could have just left it there. He could have just taken it home and left it there, but he put it on social media.
For a couple of little special girls in Liberal.
But there was one item on the list that couldn't be mailed. And 2 weeks ago, Bamberg and his wife made the trip to meet the girls with their final gift.
See those two little girls smile like that? They got down on the ground. The puppy ran and crawled up in their laps. He was wagging his little tail so fast. I mean, there's no amount of money that you can put on something like that.
And now Bamberg is much more than Santa's helper.
Do you guys feel like you've built a friendship that will kind of last a lifetime from this whole experience?
Of course, yes. Him and his wife are family to us now. They are.
How about you?
Of course. We're already planning our next trip up there in a month or two.
And his reason behind all of it is quite simple.
It's just the right thing to do. I mean, this world is crazy right now. People just need kindness.
And that was Alan Terhune reporting. Bit of your feedback before we head off. Some of you getting in touch about Queen Street. This is the experiment for just having pedestrians only in parts of Queen Street. This listener writes, to the business owner who said that pre-COVID Queen Street was the best it's ever been, obviously never tried walking down it when scooters threatened your life. Having the wider streets have been a huge improvement. They go on to say, I've lived in Auckland for 60 years and don't think I have ever once driven down Queen Street as a customer expecting to park outside a business. They talk about all the budget cuts around the city and then go on to say that the moaners are a bunch of spoilt, entitled brats. Someone else says, poor Queen Street, you can't put lipstick on a pig. Yvonne says, the only time my friends and I go near Queen Street is to a show. It's been an awful place for quite a while. Would go if the suggestion to revamp happens, says Yvonne, catching a public transport or a drop-off by taxi. Of course. We'll see you again tomorrow, Friday. Yay!
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government is under fire from opposition parties for ignoring official advice and pressing ahead with last month's housing changes. The partial sale of the All Blacks brand